Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about Melodyne, and we're going to do it on the bass. We're going to talk about kind of the tool, how the buttons and different tools work within Melodyne, some shortcuts, and then also we're going to be doing it on a bass because musically it's a much simpler thing than a vocal. Vocals tend to slide around the pitch all over the place. They're much harder to kind of interpret visually. And so we're going to start with a bass and work our way up to a vocal. So in the short term, I'll show you just this, and then I'll do another video later where we go into vocals. I'm going to throw my screen up here. I have a bass track here that we're going to edit. We did the drums already with Beat Detective Day, and that was these. It's worth noting that I've already gone through. This was the original track, and it had all these little gaps in there that I cut in and out to get rid of some extra noises and stuff, and I've transferred it all, or I've edited it all and consolidated it, and so we're going to have a much more clean track, and I know that all those edits are going to be flowing smoothly without any glitches before I get it into Melodyne, which is important. So typically with Melodyne, it's one plugin that's going to live at the top of your track, and you would put it on your vocal track in the very first slot, and you put it right on the track. In my case, I have 2 channels, but I can only work with one plugin at a time. So what I have to do is combine those 2 down to a aux track or a routing folder. So you've already seen this aux track thing, so I'm going to show you the routing folder. If you hit Shift-Command-N, you get a new track with a few different options in here, one of which is a routing folder. But if you hit Shift-Option-Command-N, it gives you that same routing folder, but gives you automatic routing into that folder. There's 2 ways I could do this. I have 2 bass tracks, and I could run this in stereo. If I did it in stereo, I would take track 1, pan it left, and track 2 and pan it right. And what that would do was get them both onto one track, and Melodyne would be on that track, and it would edit them separately and allow me also to split it later into different tracks. So you could re-EQ the bass amp or compress one or the other. And so that's a legitimate option. I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm going to run it into a mono one though, because I already have them balanced the way I want. I'm going to call this bass, mono routing folder, and it made a folder. The cool thing about a folder, I have an instrument bus, so I'm going to route the output of that to instrument. The cool thing about a folder is you can kind of hide stuff and start minimizing tracks. So I could convert this drum thing into a folder, and then I could close it and hide all of my drum tracks. And it's basically just an easy way to get rid of a lot of clutter on your screen. And I usually do it on stuff like bass where there's multiple mics, or any other thing where I've got, a handful of mics on a single instrument. I might run them into a folder. Works great for orchestral or band stuff where you got a bunch of horn sections and then string sections. You get hundreds of tracks potentially. This allows you to simplify it way down. So I'm going to select all, Command A on that track, and then I'm going to insert Melodyne. It's under Other, and then hit Transfer. And here we go. This is Melodyne 4. It has to be transferred in this way. As you upgrade to Melodyne 5 on your own rigs, you get a free Melodyne 5 Essentials, and it will show up a little bit differently. It's kind of integrated into the track itself. But for this is what we got to do. Okay, I got bored. I stopped it before I finished, but I could go back in here and hit transfer again and finish it out. But I want to show you a faster way. So here's the bass, and it's been transferred into Melodyne. And you can see all the different bass parts are all in here. But I'm going to show you a slightly faster way. I'm going to take that off. And this is kind of a hack. It's a life hack. Hit transfer, select your range. I usually give it just a little bit of extra in front and in the back. And then on the bass track, right click on Melodyne and hit commit. I'm going to commit that edit selection, not the track, but the edit selection, and then do nothing to the source tracks and then do it offline. And what it's doing is when you commit, it forces it to render through the whole track offline or quicker than real time. And so now I get to run it at 4 times the normal speed. And it's going to create a new track that has a committed version of that, but I haven't done anything yet. So I'll just delete that track because I don't actually want it. I just wanted it to think faster. All right, there it is. So that's the committed track that I didn't actually want. But if I go back to Melodyne, it transferred all that in. So there's going to be some shortcuts and stuff that I will get to you. But there's a couple key features within this that I want to show you. Just starting at the top, we have this box. This is tempo. So because I did this kind of workaround, it didn't know the tempo and it gave me an empty box. So if I click on it, constant at 170, which is what my session is, it maps my tempo to match Pro Tools. And as I hit play in Pro Tools, let's jump to measure 50, asterisk 50, enter. Hit spacebar. It's now going to play measure 50. I'm going to use that to my advantage because if I want to come over here and be like, oh, I need to work on this, I can see 67, asterisk 67, enter. If I do the right numbers, and it will play right there. But I'm also going to do 2 more things that are a little bit different than I normally monitor. I'm going to be working front to back on this, kind of inside of this window. And it's annoying to jump back and forth between the Melodyne timeline and the Pro Tools one. So what I'm going to do is turn on this guy, insertion follows playback. And if you remember, every time I hit play, it goes for a little while. If I stop on measure 70, it will stop right there, and it's going to play by my pre-roll back 1 measure. Change my pre-roll to 1 measure, and now it's going to go from 70 beat 2 to 1 measure before that. Oop. Okay, so let's say I just heard a problem there. I stopped it when I heard the problem, and if I hit play it again, play it again. If I feel like I've fixed it, I can let it roll and stop every time I hear a problem. And because of my pre-roll and the fact that everywhere I stop, it drops my playhead, it's always going to jump 1 measure before and let me work on it. This is a really fast tempo, so I might even give myself a little bit of extra. At a slow, most tempos, it's only 1 measure. Sometimes I'll do a measure and a half. Okay, so there is the bass in Melodyne. And as you go over, you're going to see these 2 blobs, or 2 settings. The edit mode is where we're going to work. This guy is the detection mode, or what do they call it? Note assignment mode. And sometimes Melodyne is going to forget how to work. And it's going to basically put notes on the wrong spot. And it will misread the harmonic series and think that it's on one note when it's actually on another. So you won't often need to use that. It's kind of a rare feature. Just leave it alone. Then we have this set of tools. They're available right here. You can just click on them, or you can right click anywhere out here and it gives you the list. Or they're by default on shortcuts. F1, F2, F3, F4, F5, F6 will give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those tools are there. I change my shortcuts. In Pro Tools, you can't change your shortcuts, but in Melodyne, you can. and I like those numbers within reach. So I'd go down to, I go to my preferences and editing tools and main scroll zoom tool. I put on 1, switch pitch tools on 2. So instead of F1, F2, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there's a couple of versions of some of these. There are different tools, just like the Pro Tools tools have different versions for each function. So if I hit 1 and then 2, keep hitting 2, and it switches between these different tools that I'm going to use. To navigate, you can scroll around, scroll for up and down, shift scroll for left and right. You can shift command click, and it changes your first tool to a scroll tool. And that's, for whatever reason, sometimes that's easier. Shift command, click and drag yourself around the screen. And then the other one is option command. This one is much more useful. In order to zoom, you have to learn kind of a new method of zooming. Option command, you click, and if you drag to the right, it zooms in horizontally. If you drag left, it zooms out. Up is zoom out vertically. Down is zoom in vertically. So you kind of click and drag at angles to get to the zoom level you want. It's very strange, but I didn't design the program. Then we get to our grid. We've got a time grid and we have a pitch grid. So the pitch grid popped up over here, and in the very bottom left, there's a little pitchfork, scale editor. There's a scale detector, or a scale detective, which shows you how often each note gets played. And that's kind of how it figures out what key you're in, or how it takes a guess at what key you're in. And so if I go over to here, you see it says E major. I can open that up and potentially change this to G major, and you'd see that the notes that are gray here, the ones that are highlighted, and the ones that are over here, all change to match that key. Pretty useful to know ahead of time what key you're in, but if not, Melodyne is a good way to figure that out. Throw Melodyne on a bass and take its best guess, because it's almost always right. The exception is when, the key of a song changes a couple of times in it, or they're using strange chords that don't belong there. Once I've got that key set, I'm going to close this down, and this little treble clef right here is turning on and off the pitch grid. So if I turn it off, watch what happens when I click. It lets me move notes around. It lets me move them around very small amounts. If I turn it on, it will move me only by notes, full half steps. So I want that off, because part of what I'm doing here is going to be tuning the bass. And then on the top right, same situation with the time grid. If you right click, you can change it to eighth notes, sixteenths, triplets, whatever it needs to be. And then if you left click, it turns on and off the grid. So with a left click and it's off, I can be able to move things around to match up with the grid, the timing grid. If it's on, it does the same thing, and it will snap by whatever rhythm you have set. So generally you would want that off. Yeah. Let's go through our tools a little bit better. The main tool is kind of like the Pro Tools Smart Tool, so I'm going to circle back to it once we've talked about the others. The next tool, pitch tool, it does pitch. If you double click, it will snap to the nearest grid, and you can see on these dark lines, those are the ones that are in tune. And the goal is to take these blobs, and particularly the line that's down the middle of the blob, and get it in tune. So this pitch tool grabs it, and think of each blob as just a handle. And they're actually called blobs. That's the Melodyne official term. The blob is a representation of where it thinks one note is. And so it shows you the pitch line, and that's more accurate. The pitch line is actually what's happening on the pitch of that bass string. And then it shows you this waveform. It's kind of a cartoon waveform that represents volume. not pitch. And just so that the volume isn't in a different place from the pitch, the blob will kind of center up on that pitch line. But there are going to be times when it doesn't make sense, where it gives you something wrong. So look at this note right here. The pitch line is going down and then back up, and the blob doesn't know where to go, so it just averages. It looks for the center of the bottom and the top, and it tries to put itself in the middle there. If I resize the blob, you'll see it do different things. And like the blob might go up there or whatever. So you can use the blob as a reference, but use the pitch line primarily, because that's telling you whether something's actually in tune or not. And by looking at it, I can say, no, that's not in tune. That pitch is halfway between an F and an F sharp, these two lines here. And F is not in this key because it's a light gray, and F sharp is because it's a slightly darker gray. So what I could do is fix it. And now that is in the key. And that line is kind of centered on this F sharp line going across. If there are more things I want to do than just adjust the overall, I can go to the different pitch tools, and pitch modulation tool will come in more handy with something like a vocal, but it essentially takes all of the wiggles that you've got on your blob and flattens them, and it will take all those pitch variations away or exaggerate them. If you double click, it goes back to default, or back to its like original. So we'll use that sometimes when you have a singer with wild vibrato, and it's going all over the place. You can clamp it down, not to get rid of it, but just to contain it or control it. The next one down is the pitch drift tool. Another useful one when the bass player, or really it's, again, probably more useful on a singer. Bass players have frets. I'll find something though. That guy. So look at this blob, and you'll see that it starts sharp and it ends flat compared to this FA line right here. It's a little above the center line and then a little bit below the center line. And this is where the pitch drift really comes in handy. Remember, you can right click to get your tools. So I'm going to switch it to pitch drift and then click and drag down, and it will tilt the whole thing. Unlike the pitch modulation tool, which clamps every moment to a flat line, pitch drift leaves the original modulation or the little pitch bounces, leaves them alone, but just kind of tilts the whole thing. So we'll use it a lot. I'll use that one a lot more on a vocal. See how this guy's sharp up here and a little flat over here? It just kind of evens them out, but leaves all the little nuance, all those little warbles that made it natural. If I had tried to do that with the pitch modulation tool, it would end up sounding pretty artificial. This is basically the T-Pain. The pitch modulation tool basically gives you the T-Pain effect, or Cher, or Travis Scott, or whoever. So that's the pitch tool. When we get into vocals, we'll talk more about this pitch transition tool, which might come in handy, and that's how it flows from one note to the next, but we'll come back to that. Third tool is the formant tool. The formant tool is meant to counteract chipmunk voice. So anytime you pitch shift something up or down, you've probably heard this 1,000 times, you pitch shift a voice up and suddenly it's, and that's because you're shifting not just the note that was made by the vocal cord of the singer, you're shifting the size of the instrument, because your throat resonates, your sinuses resonate, your mouth opening resonates, and all of those things kind of define your voice. When you raise the frequency artificially, basically you're pinching the frequency of all those resonant points that your brain interprets as having a smaller source instrument, meaning your head and neck just shrunk. So when you pitch something up, you are shifting their formant, or their kind of natural resonance, up. So what you can do with this tool is try to reverse that. If you've pitched somebody up, you can try to make their tonality go back down And it works even on a bass. But you can hear it. That was me going extreme up. Kind of gets like chipmunky. Let me put it back. Or you can shift it down, and suddenly you got monster voice or bass. So on a bass, we're probably not going to use that much, although I do occasionally use that while mixing. If the bass that was recorded doesn't really match the song, the tonality of it is too deep or too plunky, meaning like too mid-rangey, I actually do sometimes cheat and use this as like a built-in EQ. The next tool is F4 or just 4 on the thing if you've changed your shortcut like I have, and it's the amplitude tool. Amplitude is volume. So what we can use this for is fixing little volume problems. Let's say you've got a specific note that is standing out. Whoops, played that one too hard. You can adjust and try to bring it back into a more normal volume balance with the rest of the track. Sometimes there's a note that just doesn't stand out as much. Like on a bass guitar, if it's not set up really well, sometimes one string is quieter than the other 3 strings or however many strings you're going to have. So you could say like, okay, every time I hear an F sharp, it's quiet. If you click F sharp here, it selects all of the F sharps. And then with the amplitude tool, you can fix that problem globally across the entire song. So now all of the F sharps in the whole song are going to sound a little bit louder than they used to, which hopefully fixes your problem. That's a very, very cool tool. If you double click it, it mutes. Very nice for vocals because singers are much more dynamic than a bass player, and so you're gonna go from a low note up to like belting, full voice, and this can help you kind of even out specific notes very smoothly. The next one is a timing tool. Timing does what it sounds like it does. It adjusts timing earlier or later. Because we've transferred this audio into Melodyne, it actually creates an audio file for it, which means you can do stuff that isn't possible in the analog world. Like you couldn't make something happen earlier than it was played. But with Melodyne, you can, and it can shift things left or right to correct timing problems, which is pretty handy. And then the last tool is the note separation tool. This bass is going to have more problems with note separation because it's distorted and he's playing a lot of notes. But if I zoom in here, you can see, let me get rid of this. You can see all these little bumps. And each of these little bumps is potentially representing a new note. So I can see them more clearly over on this side where each of those notes separates out. Bump, bump. There's one right there. So when we talk about editing, we talk about 3 steps to editing: analyze, quantize, clean up. So this is now where you analyze. In Beat Detective, it found all the notes for you, and then you add or subtract to make it correct. So in Melodyne, it will find most of your notes for you, and using this separation tool, we're going to add or subtract separations to give it the ability to time align and to pitch correct. Then, now that you know those, let's go back to the main tool, and a lot of those most important features are all right there. On the main tool, if you click somewhere in the middle, where you have the arrow, you can do volume change, or pitch change, sorry. If you click near the edge, you'll see the icon change, just like the Smart tool does, and you can do timing changes. And if you go above, you'll see the icon change to the separation tool, and you can make separation changes wherever you see them. Like there's one, there's one, there's one. So I can, using the Smart tool, I can get in and make my timing corrections. And, you know, I didn't do a very good job of it. But I can get in there and separate, move things around, and correct pitch and timing on it. So as far as workflow goes, those are relatively simple tools. But as far as workflow goes, my first job is to analyze. So I'm going to go through the whole track and try to figure out where all the separations need to be. I'll probably skip here and go into another bass that's easier to see, because this is actually rather tricky to know where all the breaks are. So pause while I switch tracks and pretend nothing happened. All right, I'm back with a new bass track. So I grabbed the same thing. This is a track that you heard when, if you watch the trigger edit video. Much cleaner bass. So what we're going to do with Melodyne is I already transferred it in. Remember, we have 3 steps to edit: analyze, quantize, and clean up. So analyzing within Melodyne is largely making sure the blobs are where they need to be. We're going to be using the separation tool, either off of this arrow where you hover above the blob and you can separate out little pieces like that, or you can just switch over to the separation tool and do it that way. They both work the same, except one can do more things. So I'll be working off of this first one because that's my preference. So on a bass, your separations should be fairly clear. This track in particular, though, has a lot of sliding. He goes from one note and slides to the next and then slides down. So I'm going to treat that slide as a separate thing. Later, we get into time aligning and pitch correcting. We're going to use these macros that kind of globally apply to everything, just like Beat Detective did. And that's going to cause some problems when the slide is on the same blob as the regular note. It's going to affect the pitch and whether it grabs that correctly, and it will affect timing as well. So we're just going to separate those out. So that's my job right now, is to go and improve upon the separations that Melodyne gave me. Here, listen to this. If you double click, it plays inside of Melodyne. Boo-doo-doo-doo-doo. That's 2 notes. Boo-doo. And if you go left and right arrows, it will play those. So I separated those out. This slide actually starts a little bit earlier. So I use my tool to drag that slide over. And all of this slide could really be kind of just one big blob. And all I'm looking for here are things that have more than one note on a blob or one note on more than one blob. This slide is all kind of one thing, so I'll get that. And this slide starts there. And all of this is one slide. If you select them all and double click, all of those separations will go away. Bass has frets, so when you slide from a high note down to a low note, you're going to cross each of those frets and cause a little pitch to happen. So I don't need to try to tune every single one of those. They're so fast, nobody's going to notice. And because of that, I don't want a bunch of separations in there either. Just let the slide be one whole thing. There is 2 notes on this note. They're on this blob. So I'm going to add a separation. And anytime you're trying to add a separation, look for the volume change on the blob. That's the biggest indicator. And it's going to be separated right at the beginning of that volume change. So when it's at its lowest point and getting ready to come back up is really where you want to separate. This actually went to there. You can see where the pitch started. Over here, it's just kind of noise. And so I'm going to drag that separation to right there. And then this whole slide down should be its own blob. You're going to do a lot of like changing your zoom and dragging around. Remember, Option Command to do your zoom. I like to see about 2 measures left to right on screen and about an octave top to bottom on screen. I'm trying to make that separation actually between those notes. And the same here. You can see where the volume drops way down. That's where the separation should go. Some of those don't matter much, and you don't need to slow down a lot for, but you'll figure that out as you get better at it. That's actually 2 notes, and I could see a little bump and a little blip on the pitch line, but you can hear it pretty clearly. Boom, boom, boom. Dome, dome, dome. There's something else happening in here. More notes there. There's a note up there. And until you get good at reading these blobs, definitely don't be afraid to just listen and experiment, because that's how you learn how this stuff works. So I'm quite a the ways into this. Let's, for the sake of time, assume that I have finished analyzing. Let me get a few of these going. Going for a high score here. All right, so let's call that the whole song being done. Then I'm going to head back in, and I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so you can see something. If I, Command S, save often. Command A will select all, and then you go to these macros up top. The first one is the pitch macro. And if you drag that up, watch all my blobs float up and down. As I go up, they all drag in towards the nearest pitch line. If I were to hit this button that said snap to D minor, they would drag towards the nearest pitch line that's actually in D minor. So that one on the far right of your screen over here, you can see it goes all the way down to a C instead of a D flat. But that was a slide, and I'm not worried about those slides being in tune. So I'm not going to do that, and I wouldn't almost ever use that feature. Remember, pitch drift is kind of the tilt of the track, and won't come into play very often on a bass, and it might screw stuff up. So I generally just only do pitch center, and you might as well be all the way in tune. It doesn't sound like T-Pain when you go to 100%. It just sounds like a bass. And then you hit OK. Then we're going to go to the pitch quantize time macro, and it lets you choose your grid, just like in, remember, Beat Detective, when you hit Command 8, it asks you contains and what values you contain, or your drum part contains. So you can do that here, 8th note, 16ths. If there's triplets, definitely select 8th note triplets or 16th note triplets. But you can also, if it's a good player and they're already almost in time, you can go to auto and just crank it to 100% or whatever percentage you want. If you only did your drums at 50%, maybe you should not go to 100 on your bass. But you can adjust this to whatever intensity you want. It's very much like the strength of the Beat Detective edit. And that will leave a little bit of humanity if you want. But because it's auto, it goes to the closest grid, whatever value. So if it's close to a 16th note grid, it's going there. If it's close to an 8th note, it'll go to that one. If you have a song that's very stable, like boom, 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 boo-doo, boom, 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 you could select just 8th notes, and it's, even if they're a little bit sloppier, it'll always go to an 8th note then, and that may help you. If they're really sloppy and it's pulling to the wrong notes, you may have to get in by hand and just grab whole sections and move them around, just like I did on that Beat Detective video. Okay. And then we have analyzed it. We just now quantized it. And remember, you're quantizing 2 things, timing and pitch now. And so now it's time for cleanup. Those slides just got tuned and really shouldn't have been. Like, there was no reason to tune those slides because there's no center of the pitch. So what I'm going to do is reset pitch on all those. There's a slow way to do it where you right-click, reset individual edits, reset all pitch changes. But because that's pretty lame, I go into the settings, preferences, and set a shortcut for reset pitch to Q. And it's just right there where my fingers are already. So I'm just going to hit Q, and you can see all of those blobs that were tuned and shouldn't have been get untuned. So we're going to listen from the top. And remember, asterisk 21 would give me bar 21 in the main counter in Pro Tools. Enter. And I'm going to just try to outwork my Pro Tools playback while listening to make sure everything's in time and in tune. I'm going to be working just a little bit ahead of it, selecting blobs and hitting Q to reset their pitch. Kind of keep an eye also on these other blobs and make sure they're actually lined up right. All right, here's an interesting thing. I just artistically would like that to last a little bit longer. So I'm just going to use my timing tool. Felt rushed. Let me change my grid here. I think this last one was just a little bit rushed. Maybe the drummer was behind or something. I haven't beat detected these drums. So sometimes they sound good until you edit them, and then it sounds worse because one of the players or both players were out, and then suddenly only one of them is out, and you start to notice it. There are definitely those bands where you're going to have to edit the drums, and then you have to edit the bass to match the drums, and then because you're kind of, every time you edit the drums, you're pulling the rug out from anybody that was following them. So just be aware of that. Something felt funny about that timing. All of these notes are now like dead on the grid, super fast. And that's as far as I analyzed. But that's basically the process, is just go through, listen, make sure the timing is good, make sure the pitch is good, reset anything that didn't need to be edited. When we get into vocals, it'll be the same thing, except the pitches will be much less stable than they are on a bass, where all of them are going to have frets and a clear, relatively clear start and end. Vocals tend to be much more swoopy. But it'll be a similar workflow: analyze, quantize, clean up. When you're done, again, recommend you have your instructor check it out for you and with you, so you're not leaving mistakes, and make sure you're not missing anything, because once you leave, you're on your own for quality control. So then when you're done, just right-click on the plugin, commit up to this insert, commit. I usually make a selection, right-click, commit, edit selection, and do nothing to the original tracks again. I'm going to do this offline so it saves time. And then what I like to do is keep everything on one track. So I'm going to make a blank playlist on my original track, and I'm going to call it bass.md. And then I'm going to select this and drag it up. If you hold Control while you drag, it can't go left or right. It locks it into timing, so you don't have to worry about accidentally, like, slipping a little bit out of time or something like that. It will, if you hold Control, it will always go straight up. And then I can delete this extra track, which I don't need, and I'm going to just make Melodyne inactive. So it's there, and if I realize later that I screwed up and I want to improve a section, or even like they want to change a note on the bass to a new note or something, I can do all of that with Melodyne. and it's mostly done. So I'll right click, make it inactive, and it's just going to hang out there. I'm listening to the clip though. And now I have a Melodyne playlist with the edits on it, and I have an unedited version right underneath it. And that's it. Good luck. I will see you soon.